What we're doing today is going to be very similar to what we did yesterday. So they're going to be the same. We're still dealing with factoring, but there's a slight difference for what we're doing today. Because what we were working with yesterday is mainly polynomials, or really quadratics, ax squared plus bx plus c. And if you notice on pretty much every single one of those, the value of a, the value in front of the term x squared, the value in front of x squared here was 1. On the few cases where we had a number other than 1, well, it factored out when we did the greatest common factor, which turned it back into 1. What we're doing today is now a is not going to be 1. We're going to actually have other factors for a. So that's the only real difference. Our main steps are going to be the same. They're going to be the exact same, except a is going to have a value other than 1. And in the Google Classroom, I already went on and added the factoring steps. It's up in the reference material. It's up at the very top, just says factoring. So if you want to reference that, you can. So we're going to look at this here, this first problem, and we're going to factor it. Now, the first step in factoring is to see, is there a greatest common factor between 7x squared, 31x, and 20? Well, looking at this here, there's not one, because there's not going to be a number or variable that goes into all three. So there's not a greatest common factor. So that means we move on to our parentheses with 3 spaces and 3 spaces. There you go. Okay, so now that we have step 2 done, we have our 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. We need to figure out the sign. So we'll look at the third term, this 20. And since 20 is negative, the signs are going to be opposite. One is going to be positive, and the other is going to be negative. Since the 20 is negative, our signs are going to be opposite. And that finishes up step 3. Any questions on any of this here so far? Well, our next step is to find the factors of the first and third term. So we need to find the factors of 7x squared. Well, the x squared, well, the factors are just going to be x and x. Those are the only factors of x squared that we can use for this here. Now we need to find the factors of 7. Well, the factors of 7 are 7 and 1. We only have one set of factors, so we can just put them down. Anytime we just have a single set of factors, we're just going to go on and plug them in. Because we can check to make sure they're in the right spot at the end when we check. Now, the only other set of factors we need to look at are for 20. Well, 20 has 1 and 20, 2 and 10, and 4 and 5. So there's not too many factors to check, but we still have 3 possible choices. So we look at these here, 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. Which one do we want to try first? Let's try 4 and 5. So we can plug those in. And now that we've picked a set of factors and we have everything plugged in, we can go on and check it to make sure it works, and this is the correct setup. So we'll do 7x times negative 5 and 4 times x. Well, 7x times negative 5 is going to be negative 35x. 4 times x is going to be plus 4x. Well, negative 35x plus 4x is going to be negative 31x, which is what we wanted. That's the middle term that we're supposed to get. So we found the set of factors on the first try. And that's it. Questions on this here? So this here really is the exact same thing we did. It's just now instead of having x and x, we have 7x and x. We'll have numbers in front of the variable. That's going to be the only real difference for this here. So this here is our answer. Any questions on this here? All right, let's look at another one. 2b squared plus 17b plus 21 is our quadratic we're going to look at factoring. Now, when we look at this here, 2b squared, 17b, and 21 don't have a greatest common factor. There's not something that will go into all three terms. So we can't factor anything out. So we can try to factor it. So we'll have two sets of parentheses with three spaces. Two sets of parentheses with three spaces is our starting point. The next thing we need to find is the what? The sign that goes into the two sets of parentheses. And the placing kind of hint that we get is from this third term, the 21. Since 21 is positive, the signs are going to be the same, and they match the sign of the middle term. And our middle term is also positive. So we're going to have a plus and a plus. So our two signs for this here are going to be both positive. And that brings us to our factors, 2b squared and 21. So we can look at the factors of 2b squared first. So the factors of b squared are just going to be b and b. There's only going to be one factors of b times b. Now the factors of 2, well, 2 and 1. B squared and 2 have only one set of factors. There's only one set of things that multiply together to give me 2b squared. So that gives us our first set of factors. Now the other set, 21, is going to have a few more. We have 21, 1 times 21, and 3 times 7. 21 only has two sets of factors. Now which one do we want to try to use first? See which one works first. 3 and 7. 3 and 7. So I'll just plug it in. I'll plug it in like this here. I'll plug in 3 and 7, and then just check it to see if this works. Well, 2b times 7 is going to be 14b. 2 times 7 is going to be 14, and we have the b. 3 times b is going to be 3b. And 14b plus 3b is 17b. Worked out. Any questions on any of this here? All right. So looking at this one here, is there a greatest common factor between 7x squared, negative 45x, and negative 28? Yeah, so that's a little unfortunate because it doesn't go in all three. It doesn't help us much. So we'll just move on to our two sets of parentheses. So we have those with three spaces. So now we'll find the signs. Well, looking at the negative 28, because it's negative, the signs are going to be opposite. One's going to be positive, the other is going to be negative. So signs are opposite. So that moves us on to step number 4. Find the factors of the first and third term. Well, the factors of x squared, well, there's only one set, x and x. It works out there's only one factor of 7, 7 and 1. Now, we don't write the 1 because it's understood 1x and x are the same thing, so we don't have to write the 1 in. But we do need to find the factors of 28. Now the factors of 28 are going to be 1 times 28, 2 times 14. 3 is not a factor, but we do have 4 times 7. So these here are our factors of 28. Now looking at these here, which one do we want to try first? Four and 7. So we can set it up like this here, yes? I'll tell you right now, this one's not going to work, and there's a reason why. Does anybody have a guess at why we know that this one shouldn't work? I do need to flip the 4 and the 7. Because how this is written right here, well, 7x plus 7 is a greatest common factor of 7 in there, isn't there? So if this was correct, I could factor that 7 out, leaving me with x plus 1. But if there's a greatest common factor in either one of the parentheses, it means there was a common factor to begin with. Because if there's not one to begin with, there can't be one in either set of parentheses. So that tells me that 7 cannot go in this place right here. Or really, any number with a factor of 7 cannot go in that place there. And if we looked at all the sets of factors, well, 28, 14, and 7 cannot go there because they all have a common factor of 7. So we can try the other setup, 4 and 7. So 7x times negative 7 would be negative 49x. 4 times x is going to be plus 4x, which will give us negative 45x. Is that what we wanted? Well, yes. And that's it. So this here are our sets of factors. These are the set of factors for this here. Any questions on this here? Any questions on anything we've done thus far? We're ready for the next one. I'm going to skip over this one, and I want to look at this one here. Because we've looked at several of them so far. None of them have had a greatest common factor. But the factors of the first term have always been prime numbers, 1 and that number, whatever it is. This one here is a little bit different. Now, I'll tell you right now, there's not a greatest common factor here. But it'll look a little bit different when we start looking at our factors of the first and third term. But before we get there, we still have to find the signs that go inside each set of parentheses. Because the 9, the third term is negative, our signs are going to be opposite. One's going to be positive, the other is going to be negative because the 9 is negative. So that brings us to our next step, which is going to be the factors of the first and third term. Now the factors of the first term, well, m squared, the only set of factors for m squared are going to be m and m. That's the only ones that we'll have. That's the only way we can multiply m's together to get m squared. Now this time it's a little bit different because we're looking at the factors of 10 for our first term. Because we do have 1 times 10, but we also have 2 times 5. I have 2 sets of factors we have to look at. And then for 9, we have 1 times 9 and 3 times 3. So let's pick the factors for 10 that we want to use. So do we want to use 1 and 10 or 2 and 5? Let's do 2 and 5. And then for 9, we're going to pick 1 and 9 or 3 and 3. Let's try 1 and 9. So we're just going to pick a set out. And now we're going to check it to see if we get the correct middle term. We're looking for 89. So if we multiply this through, well, 2m times negative 9 would be negative 18m. m. 1 times 5m is going to be plus 5m, which will give us negative 13m. So that's not quite there. So what we can do is I can take the 1 and 9 and flip them and do 9 and 1 and see if this changes anything. Well, 2m times negative 1 would be negative 2m. 9 times 5m is going to be plus 45m, which will give us 43m. So it went up. It is a little bit closer than our first try, but it's not quite there yet. Right, because we've tried every possible combination with 2 and 5, yes? So now let's try 1 and 10. M and M. Do we want to stick with 1 and 9, or do we want to try 3 and 3? Okay, let's stick with 1 and 9. M times negative 1 would be negative m. 9 times 10m would be plus 90m, which would give us 89m. Is that what we wanted? Mm-hmm. And those are our sets of factors. And that's all we have to do for this here. So a lot of this, if you're starting to hopefully pick up and see, it's not so much that there's a set pattern. Well, there's a little bit of a set pattern, but how we pick the factors, there's not a set, this is how you pick them in this situation. But hopefully you're starting to see kind of like, okay, which are probably going to be a better choice to try. Well, the bit number in the middle is pretty big, so we might need bigger sets of factors to work with. Let's see here. Let's go on to this one here. So we're going to skip again. Let's skip one again. And move on to this one here. I'm skipping a few here and there because I feel like y'all are kind of getting the hang of this. So we're going to look at some more different examples. So we look at this one here. So 28 n to the fourth plus 16n cubed minus 80n squared. Is there a greatest common factor? 4n squared. So this one here does have a greatest common factor that we can pull out. So we have the 4 and the n squared. So if I pull this out, well, 28 divided by 4 would be 7. If I factor n squared out of n to the fourth, I take 2 away. Well, if I had 4 and take 2 away, I'm left with 2. Plus, if I factor 4 out of 16, or 16 divided by 4, I would get 4. And if I factor n squared out of n to the third, or I take 2 of the n's away, I'm left with just n. Minus, if I factor 4 out of 80, or 80 divided by 4, I'm left with 20. And the n squared will factor out completely because I took 2 away. Really what we're doing is we're just dividing each one of those terms by 4n squared and simplifying. So that's it. So we've taken out everything. There's no greatest common factors left in this. There's nothing else left in common. We've pulled that all out. We've simplified it. Now we just need to factor this here. 4n squared. So we have our 2 sets of parentheses. Which brings us to our sign, finding the sign. And when we find the sign, we're always going to be looking at the third term. And since the third term is negative, the signs are opposite. One is going to be positive, one is going to be negative. So that takes care of step number 3, which moves on to step number 4, finding the factors of the first and third term. Well, the first term, 7n squared, is not that bad, because the factors of n squared are going to be n and n. There's only one set of factors. Factors of 7 are just, well, 7 and 1. Prime numbers are nice because there's only one set of factors. Now the factors of 20, well, we've done this one before. 1 times 20, 2 times 10, and 4 times 5. Which set of factors do we want to use first? Because I have a feeling it's not going to be 1 and 20. Because I'm either going to be multiplying the 20 by 7 or kind of adding and subtracting 7 and 20. So that's probably not going to be it. So we're left kind of with 2 and 10 and 4 and 5. Which one of those do we want to try first? 4 and 5. So we'll plug those in and multiply out. 7n times negative 5 is going to be negative 35n. 4 times n is going to be plus 4n, which will give us negative 31n. Well, that's a little bit bigger than we were expecting, yes? Okay. So what we can do is we can switch the 4 and 5 and say 5 and 4. So 7n times 4 is going to be negative 28n. 5 times n is going to be plus 5n, which will give us negative 23n. Okay, well, we can throw those two out. As we've tried every possible combination, well, not every possible combination. There's two other ones, but it would just be giving us positive 31n and positive 23n. Because we could change the signs, or by doing the same thing by flipping the 7n and n. But that's not going to give us a different answer. Well, it will give us a different answer. It just won't get us anywhere closer to the value we want. So instead of 5 and 4, we can try 2 and 10. 10 and 2. So 7n times negative 2 will be negative 14n. 10 times n will be plus 10n, which gives us negative 4n. Is that what we wanted? Well, yes and no. Yes, it is the correct number, but no, it's the wrong sign. So we're almost there. Because having this here, having the wrong sign for the number is actually not a bad thing, because what that tells us is we have everything in the right spot except for the, what? Signs. Because once we get the correct number but wrong sign, we just need to flip the signs and we have it right. Because once we flip the signs, we'll have 7n times 2, positive 2, which will give us 14n. And negative 10 times n will be negative 10n, which would give us our positive 4n. So that's all we needed. Once we get the correct number but wrong sign, we flip the signs and we have it correct. Questions on this here? Any questions on anything we've done thus far? We good with this here? Yes. Okay. We'll do this one here. This will be the last one we'll do, and then I'll give you some time to work on the assignment, today's assignment and yesterday's assignment if you didn't finish it. Now, we look at these three here. Is there a greatest common factor between all three terms? Three, yes. 3b. Because 30 and 30, it's easy to see there is a common factor of 3 between them. Now, the 87 might be a little bit harder to see. One thing that we can do is if you add the terms of a number together and divide it by 3, and that number is divisible by 3, then it is divisible by 3. So if we looked at 87, if I take 8 plus 7, 8 plus 7 is 15. Can I divide 15 by 3? Well, yes, it is 5, which means 87 is also divisible by 3. It also works with 9, too. If you add the numbers together and divide by 9, then the original number is divisible by 9 as well. So let's factor out 3b. Well, if I factor 3 out of 30, well, 30 divided by 3 is 10. We didn't do anything with n squared, but we factored out the b. So when we factored it out of 30n squared b, we're left with 10n squared. Minus, well, 87, if I factor 3 out of 87, or take 87 divided by 3, we get 29. N, and we factor out the b. And last but not least, we're factoring 3b out of 30b. Well, 30 divided by 3 would give us 10, and the b factors out completely. So once we've factored out the 3b, we're left with 10n squared minus 29n plus 10. And there are no other greatest common factors. So we can move on to our two sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. So after we set this up, we're going to find the what? The signs. Since the 10 is positive, the signs are the same and they match the sign of the middle term, which is going to be negative and negative. And now we look at the factors. Well, the factors of n squared are going to be n and n. Now the factors for 10, right here, are going to be 1 and 10 and 2 and 5. Well, the other factors of 10 are 1 and 10 and 2 and 5. Because we have 10 twice, we really have the same set of factors repeated twice. Now, I'm just going to pick 1 and 10 as my set of factors. I'm doing this intentionally. Now, looking at the other set of factors of 10, would I choose 1 and 10 or 2 and 5? I'll say I pick 2 and 5. Well, here, do those two have a greatest common factor? 5. Okay, well, I can't put it that way. Well, if I put it this way, well, 10 and 2 have a greatest common factor. So that's why I picked it, because with 10 in, with 1 and 10, either choice I picked would have a greatest common factor. Because no matter how I set it up, there's always going to be a greatest common factor. Now, 1 and 10 does work, but I would have to have 10 and 1. This is going to be too big, because the middle 2 I'm going to multiply is going to give me what? 100. Because if I do this here, we would have negative n minus 100n. That's not going to work. So let's do a different set. Instead of 1 and 10 for n, we'll need 2n and 5n. So for the other set of factors, can I choose 1 and 10? No, because if I tried 1 and 10, well, I can't plug 10 in here, and I can't plug 10 in here, because either one of those would have a greatest common factor. So we have to choose 2 and 5. So what number would go here? 5. And this here would have to be 2. Because if we did it the other way, well, they both have a greatest common factor. And we can check this here. 2n times negative 2 would be negative 4n. 5 times negative 5 times 5n would be negative 25n, which gives us negative 29n. That's what we wanted. And this here is our answer. Now again, now this is just a reminder, whenever you write your answer, especially on the test, we'll take a test over this next week. If you leave off the greatest common factor, you will lose points because it is part of your answer. The greatest common factor is part of the answer. This here that I boxed, this is the answer. The check is kind of to make sure we have it set up correctly. Because there are times where it looks like we got it set up right, but the numbers are a little bit different than what we think.
Well, I have to flip the signs. I don't have to rewrite the check.
Yeah. If you flip this, just need to flip the signs, That's it. I just do the check again just so that y'all can see it does work. Because sometimes seeing is believing. Any questions on this here? I'm going to stop us here.